Welcome to our War Within Affliction Warlock starter video. Whether you're a veteran player, eager to get ahead in the new expansion, or you're just curious about the latest changes for Affliction Warlocks, well, this video is absolutely for you. We're going to cover everything that you need to hit the ground running, which includes a look at what's new for Warlocks in the War Within, the top talent choices for you, the best gear loadouts, the most optimal races, and as a bonus, we're also going to include some essential macros that you're not going to want to be without. And if you are ready to dominate in the War Within, our brand new update to the Skill Capped add-on has just dropped, giving Skill Capped members the best UI for PvP with just one click. We've partnered with the world's best players to ensure the Skill Capped UI is ready for every class in the War Within, and to bring you exclusive guides that unlock the full potential of your class. From maximizing damage to perfecting crowd control and outsmarting opponents with the latest tech, we've got you covered. While everyone else is just confused, you can instantly get ahead of the curve with our guides, which are designed to fast-track your progress and put you miles ahead of the competition. We're even so confident in our service that we guarantee you'll gain at least 400 rating or you're gonna get your money back. So why wait? Click the link in the description below now and join Skill Capped today. So to kick things off, let's discuss how Affliction Warlocks are looking in the War Within, starting with what's new. Overall, our playstyle has honestly shifted quite a bit. Instead of trying to produce the most amount of cleave damage from our dots and then flex the damage charts, we now treat our dots almost like a buffer to receive maximum damage out of Malefic Rapture, while also applying some direct damage through Nightfall with Shadow Bolts. Now, this makes our damage way less dependent on dots themselves, and instead our dots act like ramps for our new way of delivering burst. Additionally, we now experience some dramatic nerfs to our PvP talent, Rampant Afflictions, as unstable affliction damage on multiple is now reduced by 60% instead of 40% in Dragonflight, meaning that you now need to optimize your damage from Malefic Rapture and Nightfall in order to keep pressure rolling. And in all honesty here, this isn't as bad as it seems, especially with the amount of single target bursts that you're going to be able to dish out. With the amount of buffs that we receive that are related to Nightfall, which we'll discuss about a little bit later, and our buffs to Haunt, making it hit like an absolute truck and will have a ridiculously fast cast time, our damage becomes way more coordinated during burst windows. With this shift to a more single target mindset, we can now apply CC more effectively without worrying too much about it breaking. So look to throw out some fears on healers to initiate or continue a CC chain, or on off targets to reduce some damage taken. Looking into our talent trees, we experience even more changes that alter our rotation, as we no longer benefit from Inevitable Demise, making us divert from some of our common drain life picks to talents that strengthen our single target profile. We also obtain a new talent called Pact of Gluttony, allowing us to use our demonic health stone multiple times when in combat. And when this is paired with Soul Burn, you become way more tanky without being too reliant on your healer to keep you up. So while the standard Warlock and Affliction talent trees seem slightly different from Dragonflight, the main focal point of the War Within, and where most of this new stuff comes from, is from the introduction of what's called hero talents, with every class having 2 hero talent trees to choose from. For Affliction Warlocks, this is Soul Harvester and Hellcaller. Starting off with Soul Harvester, we now receive our centerpiece talent, Demonic Soul, which occasionally empowers your soul shard to have a succulent soul, and to consume this soul, you want to cast Malefic Rapture, as your next one will deal 20% more damage, and it'll unleash our Demonic Soul to all targets affected for some additional cleave damage. And speaking of Malefic Rapture, let us show you something even more exciting that centers around our capstone node. Shadow of Death, making Soul Rot way stronger of a burst cooldown as it grants you 3 soul shards all affected by Succulent Soul. This makes Soul Rot potent to use when you want to deliver massive burst with Malefic Rapture. And if you're familiar with Affliction's rotation in Dragonflight, this is where you normally wanted to spam out your Raptures in the first place, making your opponents really feel the AoE pressure. However, What makes this build feel fluid and complete are the enhancements to our single target damage, primarily through Shadow Bolt and Nightfall procs, as we now receive so many talents that buff its effectiveness and increase its damage, giving us enough power to send our opponent back to the Shadowlands with our own bare hands. Changing our focus to Hellcaller for a second, this emphasizes a more dot-oriented playstyle and focuses on our centerpiece node, Wither, which replaces Corruption. When we apply this onto our target, it becomes a stackable damage over time effect, and the only way to stack it up is to be constantly casting Malefic Raptures to consume soul shards. Now, once this dot stacks, it'll occasionally be consumed on the target for some direct damage, which increases your padding potential. Since our dots aren't as powerful as they used to be, especially with our PvP talent nerf to rampant afflictions, and how Wither requires so much casting to get damage rolling, this becomes a bit less viable in PvP. Although, this may become more viable down the line if Affliction Warlocks revert back to a cleave machine, similar to how they were in Dragonflight. Ultimately, you're going to be likely using the Soul Harvester hero build, as this greatly amplifies your single target pressure, completely shifting gears to a more old-school Warlock playstyle. But now that we have a basic understanding of what these trees offer, it's time to delve a little bit deeper and discuss how to best allocate our new hero talent points, specifically for Soul Harvester. But before we get into it though, we do want to remind you about our free article site, which has just been updated for the War Within. As always, with the start of the new expansion, things can quickly change on a dime. So we're going to be keeping all of the information found in this guide up to date in our article. And I've also included talent import strings there too, so do be sure to visit the link in the description below after this. All right, let's get back into the video. Now, on the left side of the tree, we have Necrolite Teachings, as this is one of many talents we have in this build that enhance the amount of damage we deal from our Shadow Bolt, especially during Nightfall. Then we have a choice: Friends in Dark Places and Gorebound Fortitude. Although the latter makes our Demonic Hellstone always benefit from Soul Burn without having to consume a Soul Shard, this is completely outshined by Friends in Dark Places, as you can't go wrong with a bigger absorb on Dark Pact. Down below, we have Wicked Reaping, providing us with a passive buff to our Demonic Soul, while also applying even more single target damage after consuming Nightfall. Coming back up to the middle, we receive Soul Anathema. When you release your Demonic Soul, it applies a shadow damage dot on the affected target, and if you reapply this to an already ongoing Soul Anathema, it'll add the remaining damage onto the new one. Next up, we have another choice node, Feast of Souls and Shared Fate. Although both options provide benefits after killing a target, Shared Fate is the most beneficial, as we can apply an additional dot that deals some solid cleave damage while active, but only lasts a couple of seconds. Alongside this synergizes greatly with our node directly below, Quietus, allowing us to always reap the benefits out of it whenever we consume Nightfall. Not to mention, Soul Anathema's damage profile now ticks 20% faster and is increased by 25%. So going over to the right side of the tree, we have Demoniac's Fervor. This is a great enhancer to our single target burst, as this makes our Demonic Soul deal double its amount if applied on a target affected by Unstable Affliction. Now we have our last choice node, Eternal Servitude and Gore Fiend's Resolve, with the latter only being effective in PvE circumstances. Eternal Servitude tends to be our default pick, giving us more opportunities to throw out some double spell locks onto enemy casters. And lastly, we have Sataeil's Volition, buffing our corruption by 25% and giving us more ways to generate Nightfall as we receive it whenever we use Haunt. For our capstone node, we receive Shadow of Death, and as briefly mentioned before, this greatly enhances Soul Rot to generate 3 soul shards that all have a succulent soul attached to them, which synergizes greatly with Malign Omen for even more damage on our Malefic Raptures, and to have an easier time maintaining our dots after applying them onto our preferred targets. And remember, you can find exclusive tips in our brand new class courses at skillcap.com, where we're going to be releasing new guides every week throughout the War Within. And remember that SkillCap members can also unlock premium profiles ready for the War Within in the skill capped add-on, so don't miss out. Use the link in the description to start gaining rating today. Alright, with the new additions covered, let's quickly go over what we are currently suggesting for your Affliction and Warlock talent trees. Now, as you can see, our talents have undergone a significant revamp, with the most notable change being Soul Swap. This is now one of our PvP talents instead of a talent that we select in the Affliction tree, with what's on the Warlock side of the tree being a good default setup for both Soul Harvester and Hellcaller. Briefly touching on the highlights here, over on the Warlock side of the tree, we have Soul Link for that passive 5% increase to our stamina in combination with Grimoire of Sacrifice, Dark Pact acting as our most frequently used defensive cooldown aside from Demonic Circle Teleport, providing us with a massive absorb on ourselves and is the most valuable when dampening is at its lowest, Demon Skin giving us a 0.2% absorb every second, which can stack up to 10%, and some added bonus to our armor. This makes us passively tankier all the time, and Sargeray Technique to enhance our damage during our Nightfall procs, where we want to deliver the most single target damage possible. And to touch on some potential flex talents in our Warlock tree, you have several options for customization. Howl of Terror instead of Mortal Coil is great against sub-rogue based comps to further deny their setups. However, do keep in mind that this no longer affects Windwalker's images as it used to, making this choice a bit more niche than it was before. Amplify Curse can be picked against classes that rely heavily on critting their abilities, like Windwalker monks, or casting in order to win the game. Nightmare to make sure our fears don't break as easily from our dots. And Dark Fury if you need more uptime on Shadow Fury to disrupt your opponents and for it to possibly hit more targets as this increases its radius. You can swap Fell Domination, as this is predominantly used as Affliction to double interrupt casters, to any of these choices depending on what makes the most sense. On the Affliction side, this will also be our default setup for Dark Harvester. Now, as a whole, some of the major highlights here are Haunt, which is core to your single target burst, as this additional dot deals some hefty damage while amplifying damage taken on the affected target by 10%, and in combination with improved Haunt, this is what makes its cast way faster and really pack a punch. This also gives us another way of applying Shadow Embrace to increase damage dealt onto our primary targets. Nightfall, which has been constantly mentioned in this guide, occasionally procs off Corruption to increase the damage coming out of Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul, depending on what you select. Since you're mainly going to be using Shadow Bolt, this will make it instant cast, and if Drain Soul ever becomes viable down the line, this will make it channel 50% faster than normal. And Phantom Singularity, which is great when paired with Soul Rot, as you want to utilize Soul Swap from our PvP talents to apply this on 2 targets at the same time for some absurd cleave damage. Now, as for our Affliction tree, we do have some adaptations that are worth considering, depending on the matchup at hand. However, with talent picks and builds frequently changing throughout the season, we do strongly recommend checking out our article page to stay updated on the best builds for the current meta. The final step in setting up our talent loadout is discussing PvP talents. Here we are hard-locked with one PvP talent, Jinx. Jinx is extremely helpful with dot maintenance, allowing us to apply both Corruption and Agony with one single global. Aside from Jinx, we have Soul Swap. This talent should only be selected if you're comfortable enough with maintaining your dots, and it's best against comps that are going to allow you to cast more often. You're going to be trying to use this to apply our dots on targets that we can't always connect to, primarily healers, to assist with our spread pressure and also open up potential kill windows. But if dot maintenance does tend to be difficult, you may want to pick up Rot and Decay as our replacement to help us extend our dots with Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul if this ever becomes our default pick. We're then left with one extra slot, with those choices being based on the matchup at hand. Impish Instincts is more convenient into melees, as this allows you to use Demonic Circle Teleport more often whenever you're affected by melee attacks. Nether Ward allows you to reflect any incoming spell back to the original caster, and is super useful against caster comps to change the direction of the game into your favor. And if you want to stick with Soul Swap, you can select Rot and Decay, as you can't go wrong with having an easier time handling dot maintenance. Alright, now that we understand the optimal talent choices and the reasoning behind them, the next goal is setting up our character. The first step in this process is going to be deciding on a race. The first and most preferred option is absolutely Night Elf. Given a skilled enough Warlock here, it's hard to find a more impactful racial than what this race offers, Shadowmeld. What makes this racial so interesting is how unique it is to almost any spell in the game, as you can immune some incoming projectiles or damage, including Chaos Bolt, Storm Bolt, and Mortal Coil, or negate instant cast CC like Kidney Shot, giving you a considerable advantage in almost any matchup. If you want a more defensive pick, Dwarf remains to be a solid alternative, especially to counter those pesky Asa rogues and feral druids we were all aware about during Dragonflight. By choosing this race, we get Stone Form for a physical damage reduction and a removal on all poison, disease, curse, magic, and bleed effects. Focusing on the Horde races, we have Orc as an easier alternative pick, providing us with Blood Fury, and upon using it, we receive a solid boost in our primary stat that scales the best in the beginning of every expansion. We also obtain Hardiness, acting as a 10% reduction in PvP on all stun durations for some extra needed defense. With all races out of the way, let's take a look at what's shaping up to be your best in-slot gear for Season 1. But first, since you're likely going to find upgrades along the way, let's discuss stat priority. Our main focus should be on versatility. Versatility is a needed stat as this spec, since you're more likely to take a beating and be targeted in most games that you play. Beyond this stat, focus on obtaining as much haste as you possibly can get your hands on. This makes your globals faster, it reduces cast time on spells, which helps wonders with landing CC, and it makes your dot effects tick faster, which synergizes great with Nightfall to get your hands on more procs. Then you want to get a bit of mastery. Instead of using this stat to solely buff dot damage, we're going to be using this to buff our Malefic Raptures, especially when you plan to throw it out during your Soul Rot burst windows. And lastly, Critical Strike doesn't synergize well with our toolkit, meaning we should avoid this stat at all costs. As for gear pieces to chase, we should only look to obtain the 2-piece for our tier set featured on the screen now, as our 4-piece does occasionally buff our primary dots after using Malefic Rapture. With dots being quite marginal in terms of damage, this currently isn't worth picking up. For some of our slots, we want to be crafting them with versatility and haste, primarily on gear that doesn't have these secondary stats from our Conquest vendor. This is because we're currently targeted, meaning that you're going to be equipping most of our Conquest pieces that have Verse and Haste. This also applies to jewelry, as you're going to be crafting one ring with Verse and Haste, but for our second ring and neck, use our Forged Gladiator pieces that have the same secondary stats. Our weapons will also be crafted, and for our trinket, we're going to use the Insignia and Medallion as our typical standard. Now let's get everything enchanted. Bracers, Chance of Armored Speed, Boots, Scout's March, or Planesrunner's Breeze. And then for your rings, use Radiant Versatility or Radiant Haste for both, depending on your preference. Now, due to the addition of the Vicious Jeweler setting, you're now going to be able to add gems to your helmet, amulet, rings, belt, and bracers. Now, one of these gems will be one of 3 unique PvP gems, to which the Cognitive Bloodstone suits the best, as it allows you to become immune to any CC and interrupts if you end up juking interrupts. For the rest of your gem slots, the Quick Sapphire provides the best overall boost to your favorite stats. And as for your embellishments, you're going to want to use Darkmoon Sigil Ascension on your weapon and Writhing Armor Banding on any of your crafted armor pieces, providing us a solid boost to our secondary stats when it procs, but do be sure to check out our article linked in the description below to stay up to date with these decisions as the season progresses. To finally wrap up this guide, let's go over some macros that you're going to find useful in PvP. First, we suggest having focus macros for all your important crowd control and interrupts, enabling you to control off targets without the need to deselect your current target. So that's mainly Fear, Spell Lock, Mortal Coil, Curse of Exhaustion, Curse of Weakness, and Curse of Tongues. If Hellcaller serves more of a viable pick, you're going to want to include Curse of the Satyr in our plethora of focus macros. As an Affliction Warlock, you're most likely familiar with Soulburn being an integral part of our utility and survivability. To make your rotation feel more fluid, we highly recommend using our Soulburn macros, similar to the one you see on screen now. These macros combine Soul Burn with some of our most useful spells that benefit off of it, including, but not limited to, Demonic Healthstone, Demonic Circle Teleport, and Demonic Gateway. If you end up selecting Amplify Curse in our clash tree, you'll definitely want to utilize our suggested macros that are tied to this ability. By using these, similar to the one you see on screen now, Amplify Curse is combined with our primary curse spells to minimize bind space on your action bar. These also avoid cases where you may accidentally use a curse you wanted to apply before amplifying it. And if you want to make some flashy plays by double spell lock, you're definitely going to want to use this macro. In most cases, you're going to be sacrificing your pet, giving you free reign on interrupting cast as long as you aren't in CC, and if the opponent that's casting remains in your line of sight. But if you resummon your pet with Fel Domination to interrupt with your pet, you want to use Command Demon instead. Even though it is a bit confusing, it's important to understand that you have two different spells that inherently do the exact same thing, as you're going to be using our Spell Lock ability when your pet is sacrificed, and Command Demon to interrupt from your Fel Hunter pet. And if you didn't notice, we've included this in our Focus macro for Spell Lock in order to make your rotation feel more fluid. And remember this, Skill Capped is the only service that guarantees you'll climb at least 400 rating. Now, we make this promise because Skill Capped really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Think of it like a gym membership that guarantees you'll get ripped. Crazy, right? So, get started today by clicking on the link in the description. As always, though, we want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you soon.